The mop water left thin lines across the rubber mats, and Kesha watched the lines fade as if they were trying to disappear like she usually did. Tuesday nights were the same. Vacuum the edges, mop the floor, wipe the mirrors, stack the pads, lock the door. She moved with quiet rhythm, the kind that comes from doing something long enough that your body knows it better than your mind. She liked the order of it. She liked the way the empty dojo felt before and after classes, when it was just lights, mats, and the clean smell of disinfectant. The last group of advanced students was still on the floor with their instructor. Ryan stood in the center, tall and sure, black belt tied tight, voice ringing over the sound of feet and breath. He had good timing. She could see it even when she kept her eyes down. His corrections helped kids balance better. His roundhouse kicks looked like they could cut air. Parents along the wall watched him the way people watch a man who is used to being right. He was only 28, but he had the look of someone who liked hearing the words sir. Kesha kept to her corner, headphones tucked into her pocket out of habit, not need. She didn't listen to music anymore. She read lips when she had to, read the room when she didn't. You learn to notice everything when the world is quiet. The way the brown belt lifted his shoulders before every punch. The way the tall girl in the back had perfect form but held herself small, as if shrinking might make mistakes softer. The way Ryan's smile changed when parents were close enough to hear. The front door chimed and she glanced up. Maria Santos came in with her son, Aiden, a thin boy with bright eyes who moved his hands fast when he talked. Kesha had seen them 3 weeks in a row now. She liked watching him copy the moves with the same kind of focus she used when she learned to read a room. Tonight he bounced on his toes, excited, and signed something to his mom so quick it looked like rainfall. Maria smiled and smoothed his hair, and they stepped closer to the mat. Kesha saw Ryan notice them the way a dog notices a car door closed the wrong way. Not angry but watchful. He finished the last combo with his students and clapped them off the floor. Then he turned, hands on his hips, and called out, "Mrs. Santos, can I speak with you a moment?" His mouth moved slow and clear. Kesha didn't need sound to know the tone. She'd seen that tone before at schools, clinics, offices. The one that says I have already decided. Maria nodded. Aiden stretched near the edge, copying a boy he had watched last week. His arms moved smooth. His balance was better than before. Kesha lifted her mop and kept moving, but she took a few steps closer to the mirror so she could see their faces reflected, just enough to read. Ryan started with a smile that didn't belong to his eyes. "I've been thinking about Aiden's placement." The words were careful. This program requires a lot of verbal instruction. Safety calls. Corrections in the moment. He pointed at the other students. It's not fair to him, and honestly, it can be a distraction. Maria's jaw set. He watches. He follows. She spoke slow for him to read. "You said last week he was improving." "He is bright," Ryan said, and Kesha saw that word land heavy. Bright. The word people use when they're getting ready to say no. But this is real martial arts, not therapy. He needs a program that fits his needs. The word needs drifted like smoke. A few parents stopped chatting. A couple of students pretended to tie belts while they listened. Aiden didn't catch any of it. He kept stretching, face open, movements neat. Kesha's hand tightened on the mop handle before she knew it had. She had cleaned sweat and scuffs from these mats for 8 months. She had made the place look new again after every class, made it ready for other people's strength. She had told herself it was just a job, but watching a boy who reminded her of a younger face in a photo on her fridge, she felt something rise that had nothing to do with paychecks. Maria stood straighter. He deserves the same chance as any child. He doesn't need special. He needs the door not to shut. Ryan spread his hands as if he was explaining the weather. "I'm not being cruel. I'm being honest. He can't hear commands. What happens if he can't hear an attacker?" That's when Kesha moved. She didn't plan the step. One moment she was beside the supply closet. The next she was 3 paces from them, mop balanced against her leg. She looked at Ryan. She looked at Maria. She looked at Aiden. Then she shook her head once, small and clear. Ryan's smile vanished like a light turned off. He looked at the parents watching, then back at her. "Can I help you?" he said, the shape of each word sharp. She didn't answer. There was nothing to answer. She kept her eyes on his. The room took in the silence like a breath held. "This is my dojo," he said louder for the crowd. "I don't take advice from the cleaning staff." A few students made weak laughs that died right away. Maria put a hand on Aiden's shoulder. The boys studied their faces, confused by what he couldn't hear but not what he could feel. Kesha set the mop against the wall, stepped closer to Aiden, and signed with smooth hands, simple and fast. "You are fine. Stand tall. Watch my hands if you need." He smiled so big his cheeks lifted. He signed back, "Okay. Thank you." Ryan stared. "You know sign." His eyebrows lifted like a man who'd found out the quiet woman wasn't what he thought. "So you've been listening to a private conversation?" She nodded once. She had listened the way she always did, with her eyes. A senior student, Marcus, shifted uneasily. "Sensei," he said softly, but Ryan cut him off with a slice of his hand. "This is unbelievable," Ryan called out, as if the walls needed to hear him. "Now the cleaning lady wants to coach." He turned to the room. 15 years. Third-degree black belt. Real credentials. Not just, he waved toward the mop. "Whatever this is." Kesha didn't blink. Her stillness held the space like a post in the ground. Then she lifted one finger, pointed to herself, then to the center of the mat. The gesture fell into the room like a weight. Marcus' eyes widened. Parents murmured. Aiden looked from her to Ryan, his smile fading into a kind of bright focus. Ryan stared. "Are you challenging me?" His laugh came late and stiff. "The cleaning lady wants to fight a black belt." No one laughed with him. Something had shifted. People weren't watching a scene anymore. They were watching a line get drawn. David Park, the owner, came out from the back office, keys on his belt, eyes taking in the way the room was arranged without anyone saying it out loud. One man in the center, one woman who had put down her mop, a circle of witnesses who hadn't planned to be witnesses. "What's happening?" "Professional disagreement," Ryan said too fast. "She thinks she knows better." Kesha didn't look at David. She stepped onto the mat. Her sneakers squeaked a little on the rubber, and the sound made a few heads turn, though no one would remember it later. She faced Ryan, feet set, shoulders loose, hands empty. Nothing dramatic. Just ready. Ryan's mouth tightened. He glanced at the parents, at the young students, at David. "Fine," he said. "We'll do this right. Full contact. No special treatment." David lifted a hand. "Hold on." He spoke slow and clear toward Kesha. "If this happens, it happens under rules. Safety first. I referee. No strikes to the head. No dangerous throws." He looked at both of them. "Understood." Kesha gave a small nod. Ryan threw up his hands. "Whatever. Tomorrow night. 7. Whole class can watch." He faced Kesha again. "When I win, you pack up and go. Find another job." Kesha turned to Aiden. She crouched so they were eye level and signed, "If I win, you stay. No more talk about special. You train like everyone." He answered with both hands and a grin that hurt to look at because it was so open. Maria's voice trembled as she put the words into sound for the room. "She says if she wins, he stays. No exceptions. He is a student like any other." Ryan barked a laugh that didn't sound like one. "That's your big ask?" He stepped forward and shoved out his hand, making it a deal he thought he owned. "Shake on it." Kesha looked at his hand, then at his face, then took it. She didn't squeeze hard. She didn't need to. He squeezed like a man who believed hands were for proving something. When he let go, he flexed his fingers without thinking. David scanned the crowd. 10 witnesses minimum. No phones. No posts. We keep this inside. We do it clean. Heads nodded. People breathed again like they'd forgotten. Kesha picked up her mop and walked back to the far corner. She resumed the lines across the mat, steady and straight, and the room watched the way her shoulders moved now, not small but certain. Ryan stood there longer than he needed to, as if the floor had shifted and he was waiting for it to settle. Parents gathered their kids. Students whispered what they were not supposed to whisper. Maria hugged Aiden, who signed to her without stopping. Marcus stared at Kesha's hands when she wrung out the mop and saw the ridges on her knuckles, the calluses along the palm, the marks you don't get from scrubbing mirrors. The dojo emptied slowly. The lights hummed. Kesha finished the last row of the floor and leaned the mop to dry. She locked the supply closet, switched off the mirrors and paused with her keys in her hand. In the quiet, she could see a girl in a photo on her fridge making silly muscle poses. She could see a gold medal wrapped in tissue paper in a bag she hadn't opened in years. She could feel a promise she hadn't spoken yet. She left by the back door, the cold outside air putting a fresh smell in her lungs. The city buzzed the way it always did. Above the Korean restaurant, her apartment light would be waiting. On her nightstand were hand wraps folded like a small secret. Tomorrow at 7, she would step into the center of the mat again. Not with a mop, but with the calm she had carried for so long that people mistook it for silence. And for the first time in 3 years she wasn't afraid of being seen. The night before the fight, Kesha sat in her small kitchen with only the hum of the refrigerator for company. She laid out her hand wraps on the table, smoothing them flat with her fingers the way she used to before competitions years ago. They looked ordinary to anyone else, just strips of cloth. But to her they were reminders of a life she had folded away, convinced it belonged to someone she no longer was. On the counter sat a framed photo of her younger self, standing in front of a national flag with a medal around her neck, her smile too wide for her face. Next to her, teammates leaned in, their fists raised, their uniforms crisp. That photo had stayed in a drawer for years until her niece visited and pulled it out, insisting it belonged in sight. "You look like a superhero," the girl had said, proud. Kesha had smiled but pushed it aside. Tonight, though, she stared at it longer than usual. Her body remembered things she hadn't asked it to recall in a long time. The rhythm of footwork, the tightness of a guard, the burn in her lungs after a 5-minute round. She hadn't trained in years, but strength doesn't vanish. It waits. Her silence had given her something else too, an edge most people never sharpen. She saw what others missed, noticed small shifts, twitches, habits. In a fight, that could be the difference between landing a strike or taking one. She wrapped her hands slowly, pulling the cloth across her knuckles, circling her wrists, tucking the edges in tight. She flexed her fists, testing the feel. It was familiar, almost comforting. She shadowboxed lightly, her hands cutting through the air in small arcs. Her body wasn't as quick as before, but it was steady. She knew steady could break arrogance if used right. The next day, the dojo buzzed long before 7. Students whispered in corners. Parents leaned against walls, eyes flicking toward the mat. David Park, the owner, stood with arms crossed, his expression harder than usual. He hadn't wanted this to turn into a spectacle, but he couldn't stop it either. Too many had heard. Too many wanted to see. Ryan arrived first, wearing his crisp GI belt tied in the practiced way that said he lived for the sight of it. He moved around the mat, stretching, cracking his neck, kicking the air a little harder than necessary. His friends clapped him on the back, murmuring encouragement. He gave short nods, pretending calm, but his jaw was set tight. When Kesha entered, she wore simple black sweatpants and a fitted t-shirt. No belt, no uniform. Just herself. A murmur spread through the room as she crossed to the corner. She set her bag down, slipped off her shoes, and stepped onto the mat with bare feet. No fanfare. Just presence. Ryan smirked as she approached the center. "Still time to back out," he said, his mouth moving slow so everyone could see. "No one expects you to embarrass yourself in front of all these people." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She lifted her hands into a guard, elbows tucked, eyes steady. The silence of her response was louder than anything he had said. David stepped forward, his voice carrying through the dojo. 3 rounds. 2 minutes each. No head strikes. Respect the rules. He looked at Ryan, then at Kesha. "You stop when I say stop." Both nodded. The room quieted. Even the kids pressed against the wall stopped fidgeting. Phones had been banned, but the weight of eyes was enough to make the moment feel permanent. "Begin," David said, dropping his hand. Ryan came forward quick, his footwork sharp, testing her guard with light jabs. He expected her to flinch, to stumble. Instead, she moved her head just enough, her arms deflecting without panic. He circled, feinting, throwing a low kick. She checked it with her shin steady. The smirk on his face slipped. He pressed harder, snapping out a kick to her ribs. It landed, but she absorbed it, stepping back with balance, her eyes never leaving his. He tried again, faster. This time she caught his rhythm, slipped inside, and tapped his chest with a clean, straight punch. It wasn't hard, but it was precise. The kind of punch that says I could have hit more if I wanted. The crowd gasped softly. Aiden, sitting near his mother, grinned so wide his face looked lit from inside. Ryan's cheeks flushed. He came in stronger, swinging with the kind of force meant to intimidate. But force without control leaves openings. Kesha saw them, the twitch of his shoulder before a cross, the way his right foot dragged half an inch before a kick. She didn't waste energy. She let him commit, then stepped aside, letting his own momentum betray him. Twice he stumbled forward, forced to catch himself. The timer buzzed. First round over. David called for a break, but Kesha didn't move to her corner. She stood tall, breathing steady, her eyes calm. Ryan walked back to his side, sweat already shining on his forehead, his chest rising fast. His friends clapped again, but their voices were quieter. Maria leaned down to Aiden, whispering what happened. He nodded fast, signing to her. She's winning. He doesn't see it yet. When the second round began, Ryan charged harder, pride bleeding into recklessness. He landed another kick to her ribs, another jab to her guard. But every strike that touched her seemed to cost him more energy than it gave him. She moved like water, redirecting, stepping offline, letting his anger do the work. Then with a quick pivot, she swept his leg, sending him to the mat. He hit with a thud and the room gasped again. She didn't follow him down. She stepped back, giving him space to rise. Her silence wasn't taunting. It was teaching. Ryan scrambled up, face red, fists high. He rushed again, and again she sidestepped, landing another clean strike to his torso. Not enough to hurt badly, just enough to make the point. Precision over power. Control over chaos. The buzzer sounded. End of round 2. Ryan bent over, hands on knees, sweat dripping. His chest heaved. He looked less like a black belt now, and more like a man realizing the fight wasn't going the way he imagined. Kesha stood in the center, shoulders loose, calm as if she had been waiting for this moment her whole life. The crowd murmured, the sound low but full of something new, respect. David raised his hand. Final round. Show control. Show respect. Ryan straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. His pride burned brighter than his exhaustion. He glanced at the students, at the parents, at the boy who shouldn't have been there. He couldn't lose in front of them. Not to her. He came forward again, fists flying. And Kesha was ready. Ryan's fists flew wild at the start of the third round. He came forward like a storm, punches snapping, kicks slamming against the mat loud enough to echo in the rafters. Sweat sprayed with each strike, and his breathing turned ragged, but the speed of his attack was still sharp enough to make the crowd gasp. Most fighters would have tried to match him, to meet fire with fire. Kesha didn't. She stood calm, her guard tight, her eyes steady, moving just enough to let his fists cut through air. She blocked when she had to, absorbed a few body shots when it didn't matter, then slid out of range again. The rhythm of her defense was almost insulting. It wasn't desperate, it wasn't panicked. It was patient. Ryan's smirk, the one he had walked in with, was gone. What sat on his face now was frustration. He threw a hard roundhouse at her side. She leaned just enough for the kick to skim past her ribs and countered with a straight jab to his chest. The sound was sharp, glove against fabric, and it pushed him back a step. The crowd let out a gasp. Maria squeezed Aiden's shoulders, whispering the moment to him. The boy's eyes lit up as his mother signed quickly. She stopped him. She's controlling him. Aiden grinned wide, nodding, his hands already moving. I knew she could. Ryan came back fast, anger blazing. He swung a wide hook aimed at her temple, but Kesha ducked under, pivoted, and slid behind him. Her palm touched the middle of his back, light, controlled, precise. She didn't shove. She just let him feel it like a teacher tapping a page. It told everyone watching. She could have done worse. The dojo went quieter than it had all night. You could hear the scrape of Ryan's feet as he spun around. His face flushed red and he barked, "Fight me!" His mouth opened wide on the words, spittle flying, every syllable sharp. The room caught it clearly even if no sound reached Kesha. She didn't respond. She simply raised her guard again, calm and sure. The silence of her refusal was louder than his shout. Ryan rushed her, throwing combinations too sloppy for a black belt. Jab, cross hook. Kick. Another hook. His power was still there, but his form had cracked under anger. Kesha saw every opening. His shoulders rising before a strike, his hips turning too early. She didn't need to hit hard. She just needed to show the holes. A straight left slipped past his guard. A low kick tapped his thigh. A clean parry knocked his hand aside. Each one a reminder. Each one a lesson. By the middle of the round, Ryan's chest heaved, his movements heavy. Sweat rolled down his face, soaking his GI. Kesha, though, still moved with the same steady rhythm she had at the start. Her breathing was calm, her eyes watchful. He tried one last desperate attack. A spinning back kick aimed at her ribs. The kind of move meant to end a fight, to show dominance. But his balance was off. She sidestepped and his heel cut through empty air. The momentum carried him forward, his foot sliding on the mat. In one smooth motion, Kesha hooked her foot behind his and swept. Ryan crashed down flat onto his back, the air bursting from his lungs in a loud grunt that filled the dojo. Gasps rippled through the room. Some parents clapped hands over their mouths. Students leaned forward, eyes wide. Kesha didn't pounce. She didn't need to. She stepped back, lowered her guard, and stood still, waiting. David Park stepped forward immediately, raising his hand. "Stop." His voice rang clear, his tone final. He crouched by Ryan, who lay gasping, sweat dripping down his face. David looked at him, then at Kesha. He didn't need to say who had won. Silence fell over the dojo. Not the silence of waiting. Not the silence of shock. This silence was thick, filled with understanding. Everyone in the room had seen it. The cleaner, the woman, the one ignored and underestimated, had dismantled their black belt with patience and precision. Ryan sat up slowly, his face pale, his pride shattered. He looked around at the eyes staring at him, students, parents, his own peers. He couldn't hide from what they saw. His hands trembled slightly as he pushed himself to his feet. Kesha stood across from him, calm, her guard down. Her body relaxed as though nothing about this moment surprised her. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. Her stillness carried more weight than any victory shout. Ryan's lips parted, and for a moment no words came. Then finally, with his chest still heaving, he muttered, "You got lucky." The crowd stirred uneasily, murmurs rising. Maria's face tightened, but before she could speak, Aiden shot up from his spot on the floor. He stepped forward boldly, his small hands moving fast. "She didn't get lucky. She's better than you." Everyone saw it. Maria translated loudly, her voice trembling with pride. "He says she didn't get lucky. He says she's better than you." The dojo erupted. Claps, shouts, laughter from students who had been holding back. Ryan froze, stunned at the boy's words, at the fact the room wasn't with him anymore. Kesha stepped forward then, not rushing, just closing the space between them. She raised her hand and signed clearly so everyone could see respect. "That's the rule here." Maria's voice carried the translation. "Respect. That's the rule here." Ryan's eyes dropped. He didn't argue. He didn't speak. He only bowed stiffly, his pride too raw to do more. The room stayed quiet for a beat, then slowly people began to clap. Not for him but for her. For the fight they had witnessed. For the truth it had shown. David lifted his hand again, calling for calm. He looked at Kesha, his expression softer than usual. "You've proven your point. And you've earned more than that." He turned to the students and parents. "From this day, Kesha is not just our cleaner. She is part of this dojo. She trains here. She teaches here if she wishes." Gasps spread again, but this time they carried warmth, not shock. Maria's eyes filled. Aiden bounced on his toes, signing wildly. "She belongs. She belongs here." Kesha didn't move for a moment. The weight of his words settled heavy in her chest, not as pride but as something else, recognition. Slowly she nodded once, steady, the same way she had nodded when she first challenged Ryan. The dojo was still. Then from the back, one of the students began to clap. Another joined. Soon the room was full of it, the kind of applause that doesn't end quick, the kind that carries gratitude. Ryan stepped back into the corner, small for the first time. Kesha stood in the center, not triumphant, not boastful but calm, her silence speaking louder than any words. The fight was over. But what it left behind was just beginning. When the clapping finally slowed and people began gathering their things, the dojo still buzzed with an energy no mop or disinfectant could wipe away. Parents whispered to one another in the corners, their glances carrying something new when they looked at Kesha. Students who had once walked past her as if she were part of the furniture now lingered, their eyes wide with respect and questions they didn't dare ask. Ryan kept his head down, towel pressed to his face as he moved toward the locker room. His friends avoided eye contact, their encouragement from earlier now silenced. The authority he carried so easily had slipped away in front of everyone. He had no jokes left, no smirks. He looked smaller with every step. Maria and Aiden waited by the benches. The boy couldn't stop moving his hands, signing to his mother as fast as lightning. She laughed through tears and translated bits out loud for anyone close enough to hear. He says she's like a superhero. He says he wants to be like her one day. He says he knew she would win because she was calm like water. Kesha approached quietly, her t-shirt clinging with sweat, her wrapped hands still snug. Aiden looked up at her as though she had just stepped out of a comic book. He signed boldly, "You are the strongest person I've ever seen." Maria repeated it softly, her voice trembling. Kesha smiled, just a faint lift at the corner of her mouth, and signed back. "Strength is not about winning. It's about standing when they want you to fall." Maria's breath caught at the weight of the words. She nodded slowly, tears in her eyes, while Aiden signed again with a grin so wide it threatened to split his face. "Then I am already strong, right? Because I never fall." Kesha nodded once firmly. And for the boy it was more powerful than a cheer. David Park stepped forward then, his face serious but his eyes holding something gentler than his usual hard stare. "Kesha," he said, making sure to enunciate clearly for her. "You fought with discipline. You showed respect. That is what I want in this dojo. If you agree, I want you here not as staff, but as teacher." The room stirred at his words. Parents leaned forward, whispering. Students' eyes grew wider. Kesha froze. For a moment, the weight of what he'd offered pressed down like a flood. Memories stirred. Crowds roaring years ago. Medals heavy around her neck. Interviews she had avoided because questions about her hearing always overshadowed her performance. Then silence. Then folding her uniform away, tucking her medals into tissue paper, deciding the world had no more place for her in it. And now here a man was telling her there was. Her chest tightened, but she shook her head slowly. She signed, "Not yet. Maybe later." Maria spoke the words gently, her tone respectful. David didn't push. He nodded once. "The offer stands. Whenever you are ready." The crowd began to thin. Parents ushered their children out, some pausing to squeeze Kesha's hand, to bow, to thank her. Students waved shyly, their voices filled with the awe usually reserved for champions they saw only on screens. When the room was finally empty, Kesha gathered her bag. The mop leaned against the wall where she had left it. Forgotten. She reached for it, but Marcus, the senior student, was already there. He picked it up before she could. "Not tonight," he said simply, handing it off to another student who had lingered. "You earned a break." Kesha hesitated, then let it go. It felt strange, walking out of the dojo without the mop in her hands. Strange but lighter. That night, back in her apartment, she pulled down the box from the top of her closet. Inside lay her old GI, yellowed slightly with time, the fabric still stiff where sweat had dried in past battles. Her medals clinked softly as she lifted them out, one by one, running her fingers across the engraved words. National champion. Paralympic medalist. She sat at her table, the city's glow filtering through her curtains, and for the first time in years she let herself remember. Not the pain of walking away, but the pride of once being seen. The next morning, the dojo hummed with new energy. Whispers about the fight had spread faster than anyone expected. Even without phones or posts, word traveled through parents, neighbors, students. By the time the beginner class started, more children had shown up than usual. Some came early just to catch a glimpse of the woman who had stood her ground. Kesha tried to keep her head down, but it was impossible. Everywhere she walked, eyes followed. Maria caught her in the lobby, gratitude etched deep in her face. "Last night, you changed everything for him," she said softly. "For me too." Aiden, tugging at his mom's sleeve, signed quickly. "Will you train me too?" Maria smiled, translating with a hopeful glance. Kesha crouched to meet his eyes and signed carefully. "I will help you. But you must promise to work hard. Harder than anyone." Aiden's hands flew fast. I already do. For the first time in a long time, Kesha laughed. A soft, genuine sound that surprised even her. But not everyone in the dojo was smiling. Ryan returned later that week, avoiding everyone's eyes, his GI rumpled, his belt tied sloppily. His pride had taken the heaviest hit. And though he bowed in class and followed drills, something in him had cracked. His voice, once loud and commanding, was quieter. The swagger in his step was gone. Some students avoided his gaze. Their respect shifted elsewhere. One evening when most had left, he lingered by the lockers. Kesha passed with her bag slung over her shoulder. He stopped her with a low voice. You embarrassed me. His mouth moved stiffly. In front of everyone. She paused, her expression unreadable. She signed slowly, clearly. You embarrassed yourself. I only showed the truth. Maria, nearby, caught the exchange and translated softly for him. Ryan's face darkened. He turned away, muttering under his breath, but he didn't push further. Not yet. As weeks passed, things began to shift. Kesha trained quietly with a few students after hours. Marcus joined sometimes, eager to learn from her patience. Aiden flourished, his movements sharper each class, his confidence blooming. Parents began to ask about her story, whispering about medals and tournaments. Rumors grew that she had been a champion, that she had fought on international mats, that her silence wasn't weakness but discipline. The dojo itself seemed different. Where once silence was heavy with dismissal, now it was filled with respect. Students looked at Kesha not as the woman with the mop, but as someone whose presence demanded attention. And yet, Ryan simmered in the background, his pride bruised, his authority chipped away. Each glance at her felt like a reminder of his failure. And each time Aiden smiled up at her, it stung him deeper. Kesha knew storms don't always end with the first strike. Some take longer to pass. Still, she carried herself steady, each step measured, each nod calm. She had fought one fight. She knew others were coming. But now, at least, she wasn't fighting alone. The weeks after the fight carried a different rhythm inside the dojo. Students who once barely noticed Kesha now greeted her with small bows. Parents smiled as she passed, some stopping to thank her quietly for what she'd done. The mop still leaned in its closet, but most evenings Marcus or another student took it out before she could. You shouldn't be cleaning, Marcus said once, almost shy. Not after what you showed us. Kesha only gave a faint smile in reply. Old habits die harder than sweat. Aiden bloomed the fastest. Where before he had hovered at the edge of classes, copying movements with timid precision, now he stepped onto the mat with confidence. His hands moved quick, asking Kesha questions between drills. She answered with short signs, then demonstrated with her body, slower punches, sharper kicks, small corrections that made his balance steadier. He soaked it all in like a sponge. Other kids began to notice too, copying her little tips, following her calm instruction. Bit by bit, she had become more than a presence. She had become a teacher, whether she accepted the title or not. But Ryan lingered like a shadow. His pride hadn't healed. His voice had lost its sharpness in class, and his jokes no longer drew laughter. Where he once carried himself like the pillar of the dojo, now his shoulders slumped under the weight of what had happened. And every time he looked across the room at Kesha, kneeling to show Aiden how to pivot, guiding Marcus through a proper guard, something hardened in his jaw. One night, after most had left, Ryan cornered her near the back. The room smelled of sweat and disinfectant. He stood with arms crossed, his belt hanging loose, his eyes dark. You think you belong here now? His mouth moved slow, bitter. One lucky fight, and suddenly you're the star. Kesha watched his lips carefully. She didn't answer right away. Then she signed clearly. I didn't ask for attention. I asked for respect. Maria, packing Aiden's gear nearby, caught the exchange and translated softly. Ryan's face tightened. Respect? He spat, the word curling off his lips like something foul. You humiliated me. In front of my students. My community. Kesha stood still, her silence steady. Then she raised her hand again, signing one phrase. Humility is not humiliation. Maria hesitated before repeating it, almost in awe of the weight behind the words. Ryan's face burned. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You don't know who you're messing with. David Park's voice cut in from the doorway. Enough. His steps echoed as he approached. His expression was stern, his tone sharp. Ryan, you've done enough damage. Let it go. Ryan clenched his fists but said nothing more. He turned abruptly, storming into the locker room, the door swinging shut behind him. The sound lingered in the silence that followed. David looked at Kesha, his expression softer. You've handled yourself well, he said. Better than most would. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But it may be time for people to know who you really are, before rumors grow into something else. That night, back in her apartment, Kesha pulled out the box again. The metals gleamed faintly under her lamp. She held one up, the ribbon frayed at the edges, the metal cool against her palm. She remembered the cheers of arenas, the flashing cameras, the headlines that called her an inspiration before moving on to someone else. She remembered the loneliness too. The way coaches doubted her. The way interviews twisted her story into tragedy instead of triumph. It had been easier to step away, to fold that life into a box and hide behind silence. But maybe David was right. Maybe hiding wasn't strength anymore. The next week, David called for an all-dojo meeting. Students and parents gathered, curious, filling the mats with chatter. Ryan stood in the corner, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. Kesha lingered near the back, uneasy. David stepped forward. Many of you know Kesha as the one who keeps our dojo clean. Some of you saw her fight. What most of you don't know is her full story. He gestured for her to come forward. She hesitated, every step heavy. Dozens of eyes turned toward her. Whispers rippled. Aiden's hands flew quick. It's okay. They should know. His grin was encouragement enough. David held up a medal. One Kesha had finally let him borrow. The engraved words caught the light. Paralympic Games. Gasps filled the room. This woman, David said firmly, was not just a champion here. She was a champion on the world stage. She represented this country. She fought and won against the best. Her silence was never weakness. It was strength, discipline, patience, qualities every martial artist should honor. The room erupted in applause. Parents clapped. Students bowed deeply. Aiden cheered with both hands, his signing wild with joy. Kesha stood still, heat rushing to her face. She hadn't wanted this. But as she looked around, she realized it wasn't about spotlight. It was about truth. About showing kids like Aiden that their dreams weren't fragile. But in the corner, Ryan's jaw clenched tighter. His eyes burned with something beyond anger now. Something closer to desperation. That night, he left without a word. Over the next days, whispers reached Kesha. Ryan had been visiting another dojo across town, training harder than usual. Some said he wanted a rematch. Others said he wanted to prove her victory had been a fluke. She didn't ask. She didn't need to. She could see it in his face each time he passed her. This wasn't over. Yet Kesha stayed calm. She trained quietly with students, guided Aiden, answered questions with patience. She refused to carry Ryan's storm inside her. Still, storms have a way of breaking through walls. And she knew, deep down, the silence in the dojo wouldn't last. Ryan's bitterness was like a stone tossed into still water. It spread in rings, quiet but constant, until it touched everyone in the dojo. He didn't shout in classes anymore. But the sharp edge in his corrections cut deeper than before. His once playful sparring turned mean, his kicks landing heavier, his grabs rougher. Students who had admired him began shifting away, pairing with each other instead of volunteering to face him. Parents whispered more openly now, their eyes flicking between Ryan and Kesha, comparing one's simmering resentment to the other's steady calm. David Park noticed it all. He pulled Ryan aside more than once, his tone firm. You're here to build, not to bruise. If your pride is hurt, fix it outside these walls. But Ryan only nodded with clenched teeth, his eyes always straying back to Kesha. Kesha, for her part, kept to her quiet rhythm. She trained with Marcus, guided younger kids, helped Aiden perfect his footwork. She spoke little, but her presence filled the space Ryan had left hollow. And though she never sought the spotlight, it came to her anyway. The way students turned to her when confused, the way parents asked her advice, the way even the smallest child seemed to straighten when she passed. That gnawed at Ryan more than the loss itself. Losing once he could call bad luck. But losing respect, that was a wound he couldn't close. One Friday evening, after the advanced class finished, Ryan stood in the center of the mat, sweat shining on his face, his fists clenched. Students lingered on the edges, packing their bags, when his voice cut through the air. "I want a rematch." The words landed like a dropped weight. Heads turned. Murmurs rose. Kesha looked up from where she'd been rolling pads. She met his eyes calmly. Her silence was steady, as if daring him to fill it with more. Ryan did. He stepped forward, his voice loud enough for everyone. "Last time wasn't fair. I wasn't prepared. You blindsided me. If you're really what they say you are, prove it again." The students froze. Parents stiffened. Maria clutched Aiden's shoulder. David Park entered from his office, his face like thunder. "Enough, Ryan." His voice cut sharp. "You embarrassed yourself once. Do you really want to drag this dojo deeper into your pride?" Ryan didn't look away. His eyes stayed locked on Kesha. "You owe me." Kesha stood slowly, setting the pads aside. She didn't rush. She didn't frown. She simply stepped onto the mat and faced him, her hands at her sides. Her stillness pulled the noise out of the room. Then she raised one hand and signed a single word. "Why?" Maria translated softly. Ryan's jaw worked. "Because they think you're better. Because they look at you like you're the champion and I'm nothing." His mouth twisted. "I can't let that stand." The dojo stayed silent. Everyone could feel it. This wasn't about proving skill anymore. It was about Ryan's desperation. David stepped closer. "No. This ends here." But Marcus, who had been watching carefully, spoke up. "Sensei Park. Maybe it should happen. Maybe it's the only way he'll see." The room stirred with murmurs of agreement. Even parents who feared tension knew something bigger was at stake. David hesitated, his gaze moving from Ryan's clenched fists to Kesha's calm face. Finally, he exhaled. "Fine. But under rules. And with respect. If either of you crosses the line, you're out. Permanently." The mats were cleared. Students lined the edges, their faces pale with anticipation. Maria pulled Aiden close, whispering reassurance. He signed quickly. "She will win again. I can feel it." Ryan bounced on his toes, slapping his gloves together, his breath fast. He moved with the energy of a man who believed anger could carry him farther than discipline. Kesha wrapped her hands in silence, her movements deliberate. She didn't look at him. She didn't look at the crowd. She simply tightened the last knot, stood and walked to the center. David raised his hand. "Respect first." Ryan bowed quickly, eyes flashing with defiance. Kesha bowed too, lower, her posture humble yet strong. "Begin." Ryan charged instantly, fists flying. He didn't test this time, didn't probe. He threw himself forward with all the fury of weeks spent simmering. His punches snapped against her guard. His kicks thudded into the mat as she stepped aside. He snarled with effort, but every strike seemed to bounce off the calm wall of her defense. Then, with a swift pivot, she slipped inside his guard and tapped his ribs with a clean cross. The crowd gasped. Ryan roared, swinging wild. She ducked, sidestepped, answered with a low kick that buckled his knee. He stumbled, catching himself just before he fell. The room buzzed with whispers. Kids leaned forward, parents' eyes wide. Maria's hand shook as she translated for Aiden, who clapped with joy at every move. Ryan's attacks grew sloppier, his breathing ragged. He tried to grab her to wrestle her down, but she twisted free, landing a palm strike that sent him staggering back. Still he charged again. And again she stopped him. Each time the crowd saw it clearer. She wasn't just surviving. She was teaching. Every move, every strike, every dodge was a lesson written in sweat. By the end of the second round, Ryan bent over, his chest heaving, his pride in tatters. Kesha stood straight, her breathing steady, her silence filling the room like a drumbeat. David stepped in, his hand raised. "Enough. We've seen all we need." But Ryan shoved his hand aside, desperation in his eyes. "No, not until she falls." Kesha raised her hands one last time. Not in anger, not in pride, but in patience. The crowd held its breath. And as Ryan lunged forward, reckless, she swept his legs cleanly, sending him crashing to the mat harder than before. This time he didn't get up right away. The dojo fell utterly silent. Kesha stepped back, lowering her guard. She bowed, the gesture simple and final. David knelt by Ryan, then looked up. "It's over." The students erupted, not in cheers, but in applause filled with respect. They clapped for control, for humility, for truth. Aiden signed with both hands, his face glowing. She won with silence. Maria's voice carried the words across the dojo. And for the first time Ryan's eyes flickered, not with anger, but with something closer to shame. The storm had broken, but the lesson it left behind would echo louder than any shout. The mat still trembled faintly from the echo of Ryan's fall, but the dojo itself had gone strangely still. The applause faded into something softer, respectful silence, the kind that lingers when everyone knows they've witnessed more than a fight. Ryan stayed on the floor a moment longer, his chest rising and falling, sweat dripping down his temple. His eyes flicked up at Kesha, who stood calm, her guard lowered, her breathing steady. For the first time he didn't look at her with anger. He looked at her with something closer to defeat. David crouched beside him, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "Ryan," he said clearly, "that's enough. You fought twice. The lesson is plain." His tone wasn't scolding but final. The crowd understood it too. Whatever authority Ryan once commanded had unraveled, and no second rematch could stitch it back together. Ryan pushed himself up slowly, his movements heavy. He bowed stiffly toward David, then toward Kesha. The gesture was jerky, his pride still raw, but it was the closest thing to surrender he had ever given. Without another word he walked to the locker room, the door clicking shut behind him. The moment he left, the room exhaled as though a storm cloud had finally passed. Students whispered to each other, their voices filled with awe. Parents exchanged glances, some with small smiles tugging their lips. Maria hugged Aiden tight, tears glistening at the corners of her eyes while his hands flew quick, his signs bursting with excitement. "She is stronger than anyone. She is my hero." Kesha bent down to meet his eyes and signed back, simple but firm. "So are you." Maria translated softly, but the boy had already understood. His grin widened, his small fists clenched with pride. Over the next days the dojo carried a new energy. Students asked if they could train with Kesha after class. Parents lingered longer in the lobby, thanking her, asking questions. Marcus practically shadowed her, watching how she corrected a stance, how she moved with patience instead of power. "It's like you see everything before it happens," he said one night, awe in his voice. Kesha only smiled faintly and shook her head. She signed to him, "I just listen." The more she gave, the more the students leaned toward her. They respected Ryan's skill, yes, but his fire no longer inspired them. Her calm, her silence, her ability to turn defense into strength, that spoke louder than any shout. Slowly, she became the center of the dojo without ever asking to be. David saw it clearly. One evening, after the last class ended, he found her sweeping the mat, not with a mop but with her bare hand, checking for loose tape. "You can't hide from this anymore," he said, crouching beside her. "They look to you now. They see you as more than staff. You've already started teaching." She glanced up, uncertain. She signed, "I never wanted the spotlight." David nodded. "Neither did I once. But responsibility finds us when it wants. You've carried silence like armor for years. Now it's time to let it carry others." The words stayed with her. That night she didn't open her box of medals, but she thought of them. She thought of what it would mean to wear her GI again, not as a competitor but as a teacher. The shift became undeniable the following week. A group of beginners huddled uncertainly at the start of class. Ryan wasn't there. He had taken leave, claiming he needed time. David was busy with advanced students. Without prompting, Kesha stepped forward. She motioned for the kids to line up, adjusted their stances, and guided them through the basics. Her hands moved carefully, demonstrating, correcting with gentle taps. Her silence didn't confuse them. It made them focus more. By the end of class, the parents clapped. One mother approached her, tears in her eyes. "My daughter never listens to anyone," she whispered. "But tonight she listened to you." Kesha bowed her head slightly, humbled. It wasn't long before David made it official. "Starting next month," he announced at the end of a session, "Kesha will be teaching fundamentals twice a week. Attendance is optional, but I strongly encourage it." The response was overwhelming. Kids rushed to sign up, parents nodding eagerly. Marcus grinned from ear to ear, slapping Aiden on the back. The boy beamed, his hands signing fast. She is my teacher now. She is everyone's teacher. Kesha felt a weight settle in her chest. Not heavy like before, but steady like something anchoring her. She accepted. And so it began. Her classes were different from Ryan's. She didn't bark commands. She didn't demand loud kiais or sharp bows. Instead, she used her eyes, her gestures, her silence. The students leaned into her calm, learning to breathe, to see, to move with patience. They began to understand that martial arts wasn't about crushing opponents, but about finding balance in storms. Even parents noticed the change at home. He's calmer now, one mother said, watching her son bow to Kesha after class. It's like she taught him more than kicks. Ryan returned eventually, quieter, humbled. He no longer challenged her. He trained, he taught, but his fire dimmed. And though he remained skilled, he knew the dojo's heartbeat had shifted. It belonged to her now. Late one evening after locking up, Kesha sat in the darkened dojo, the mats cool beneath her feet. She thought of the girl in the photo on her fridge, metal heavy on her neck, smile too wide. She thought of the years she had hidden, convinced silence was only for survival. And she thought of Aiden, small fists clenched, signing with pride that he was strong because he stood tall. She realized then that her silence had never been emptiness. It had been waiting. Waiting for the right moment, the right place, the right fight. And now, at last, the silence had turned into something else. Something the whole dojo carried with them when they stepped onto the mat. Respect. The dojo's transformation didn't stay inside its walls. Word spread like air through cracks, subtle at first, parents telling neighbors, students bragging at school, whispers at other martial arts gyms. Soon the story of the quiet woman who had silenced a black belt wasn't just dojo gossip. It was a tale carried across the community. One Saturday morning, the beginner class overflowed. Mats were crowded with children lined shoulder to shoulder, some wearing new uniforms stiff with creases, others still in sweatpants and t-shirts. Parents lined the wall, squeezed into corners, their shoes filling the entryway. Some had come not because their kids wanted to learn martial arts, but because they had heard about her. Kesha stood at the front of the room, her gi crisp, her belt tied plain without color or title. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. A simple gesture brought the line to order. A soft nod started the warm-ups. The kids followed, mimicking her steady rhythm. Even the parents noticed how silence instead of commands drew sharper focus. When class ended, one father lingered, his hand resting on his daughter's shoulder. She has ADHD, he said quietly, eyes filled with cautious hope. Everywhere else people say she can't focus. But in here, he gestured toward the mat. She doesn't blink when you move. It's like she hears you better without words. Kesha bowed lightly, signing a thank you. The man's daughter smiled shyly, bowing too. By the following week, more parents came forward. A boy with dyslexia who felt out of place in school. A shy teenager who barely spoke in public. An immigrant child who still struggled with English. Each found something on those mats that classrooms, playgrounds, and even other dojos hadn't given them. Belonging. Maria often translated when needed, her voice soft but sure. She had become more than Aiden's mother now. She was Kesha's bridge, her advocate. They see what I see, she told her one evening after class. Your silence doesn't shut doors. It opens them. But where respect grew in some corners, resentment still simmered in others. Ryan taught fewer classes now, his following thinned, but he hadn't vanished. He watched from the sidelines, arms crossed, his pride smoldering like coals under ash. He no longer lashed out openly, but his presence was heavy. A reminder that pride doesn't fade quickly. Kesha didn't chase him. She knew storms either burn out or break themselves. Her focus stayed on her students. As weeks turned to months, the dojo changed shape. It wasn't just a place to train anymore. It became a place where parents lingered, where kids stayed after class to help roll mats, where stories were shared. David noticed it most. This feels like the dojo I dreamed of when I opened it, he admitted one night, leaning against the wall. Not just skill but community. Kesha nodded slowly. She didn't need words to agree. It wasn't long before others outside the dojo noticed. A local reporter showed up one evening, notebook in hand, asking about the deaf champion teaching kids to fight with patience instead of noise. Kesha resisted at first, shaking her head, but David and Maria convinced her. If you don't tell your story, someone else will. And they won't tell it right, Maria said firmly. So Kesha sat, hands folded, eyes steady while Maria helped translate. She didn't brag about medals or fights. She spoke of respect, of balance, of the boy who stood taller when told he belonged. The article ran with the headline, "Silence Speaks Louder. Champion returns as teacher in local dojo." The effect was immediate. Calls came in. Emails too. Parents from other towns asking if their children could join. Former students who had left years ago wanting to return. Even schools asked if she might speak to kids who struggled to believe in themselves. Kesha kept her calm rhythm, not letting the noise change her. She still showed up early, still lined up pads, still moved with the quiet precision of someone who listened more than she spoke. But inside, she felt something shift. Like the silence she once carried for survival had turned into a banner others could follow. One evening after a packed class, Aiden approached her with Marcus at his side. His hands moved fast, excitement spilling out of him. "I want to be like you. I want to teach too." Kesha bent to meet his eyes and signed back. "Then you must learn patience first. Teaching is not about being strong. It's about making others strong." Maria translated softly, her voice trembling. Aiden nodded fiercely, determination flashing in his eyes. Marcus chuckled. "Sounds like she just gave you homework, buddy." The boy laughed, his hands already moving. "I will do it. Promise." That night, Kesha walked home through streets alive with neon signs and the hum of traffic. She thought of the photo on her fridge, the medals tucked in their box. For years they had been reminders of a life she thought was behind her. Now they felt like stepping stones leading to something greater. Not the roar of crowds, but the quiet of children finding their strength. Still, she knew change always draws challenge. Whispers reached her ears. Other instructors across town questioning her legitimacy, saying she used pity to win followers, saying Ryan's loss was staged. She didn't chase those words either. She let them swirl outside her silence. But she also knew, storms don't always die on their own. And when she saw Ryan one evening, standing in the shadow of the doorway long after class had ended, his eyes hard, she understood. He wasn't finished. Not with her, not with himself. But Kesha had changed too. She was no longer the woman mopping mats in the corner, invisible. She was the center of something larger than herself. And if Ryan brought his storm again, this time she wouldn't face it alone. The storm broke on a night that had started quietly. It was late winter, the dojo warm with body heat and effort, the mats slick under bare feet. Kesha's fundamentals class had just finished. Parents clapped politely, kids bowed, and Aiden lingered near her, proudly demonstrating his new roundhouse for anyone who would watch. The room hummed with the kind of joy that comes when a place feels safe. Then the door slammed. Ryan strode in, his GI already tied, his belt cinched so tightly it dug into his waist. His hair was damp with sweat, as if he'd been training elsewhere, pushing his body past exhaustion. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw tight. The chatter in the dojo dimmed to silence. David rose from where he had been speaking with parents. "Ryan, this isn't your night." His voice was calm but edged with warning. Ryan ignored him. His gaze locked onto Kesha across the mat. "You think you've replaced me?" His words cut sharp, his chest rising and falling. "You think silence and pity make you a teacher?" Gasps rippled through the parents. Maria pulled Aiden closer, shielding him instinctively. Marcus stepped forward, tension in his shoulders. Kesha stood still. She didn't flinch. She didn't answer. Ryan threw his arms wide. "Let's end it right now. No rules. No excuses. In front of everyone." His words tumbled out fast, anger spilling. "You and me. If you win, I walk away for good. If I win, you leave this dojo and stop pretending you belong here." The weight of his challenge hung heavy in the air. Students shifted nervously, eyes flicking between the two. Parents whispered, their voices thick with unease. David stepped forward, his voice firm. "This is not happening. Not in my dojo." But then Maria spoke, her voice carrying, strong despite her shaking. "No, David. It already has." She looked at Kesha, then at Ryan. "He won't stop until she silences him again. And we are all tired of his poison. Murmurs of agreement swept the room. Even parents who once respected Ryan nodded grimly. David's shoulders sagged, resignation in his eyes. He turned to Kesha. Are you willing? Kesha didn't move for a long moment. Then she stepped forward, her face calm, her silence deeper than Ryan's roar. She untied her jacket, rolled her shoulders, and bowed. The room erupted in whispers. Marcus helped clear the mats, his jaw set. Kids pressed against the walls, their eyes wide. Maria signed to Aiden quickly, stay back. Watch carefully. This is important. Ryan cracked his knuckles, his grin tight and angry. No rules, he repeated. We finish this. David raised his hand reluctantly. You fight with respect, or this is your last night here. Ryan gave a mocking bow. Kesha bowed low, her movements grounded. The room went still. Begin. Ryan lunged first, faster than before, fury fueling his strikes. His fists hammered, his kicks snapped like whips. He attacked high, low, relentless, trying to overwhelm her. The crowd gasped at the sheer force of him. But Kesha didn't meet force with force. She stepped aside, blocking where she needed, letting his power crash into empty space. Her silence was strategy, each movement efficient, nothing wasted. Ryan roared, swinging wild. She ducked, countered with a sharp body shot that sent him stumbling back. Gasps filled the air. He charged again. She slipped inside, hooked his arm, and sent him sprawling to the mat. He rolled up quick, shame twisting his face. You're nothing but luck, he spat, sweat flying. He lunged again, this time aiming a strike that would have been dangerous if it landed. The dojo shouted in alarm. Parents stood. Kids cried out. But Kesha caught his wrist mid-swing, twisted smoothly, and dropped him to his knees with a lock that froze the room. His face contorted in pain, his body trapped. She held him there, not crushing, just controlling. Her eyes stayed on his, calm and unwavering. Then she signed with her free hand, slowly, deliberately, respect. Or leave. Maria's voice trembled as she translated. Respect. Or leave. The dojo fell utterly silent. Everyone heard it. Everyone knew it was the end. Ryan's breathing came hard, ragged. His pride fought, but his body knew he was beaten. At last his eyes dropped. His free hand tapped the mat. A surrender. Kesha released him instantly, stepping back. She bowed. The room erupted. Not in wild cheers but in thunderous applause, filled with relief, respect, and something deeper. Parents clapped hard. Students shouted her name. Even David's face softened into the faintest smile. Ryan stayed kneeling, his head low, sweat dripping. Slowly he stood, but he didn't look at anyone. Without a word, he untied his belt, dropped it on the mat, and walked out. The door closed behind him, and this time it didn't feel like he'd return. David stepped forward, his voice steady but heavy with finality. From this day, Kesha is not only a teacher here. She is our instructor, our example. Let her silence remind us of what martial arts truly means. Applause swelled again, louder than before. Kids rushed forward to bow to her. Parents shook her hand. Maria wept openly, and Aiden signed furiously with both hands. You are my master now. My teacher forever. Kesha crouched, signing back. You are already strong. One day you will teach too. The boy's grin lit the room brighter than any spotlight. And in that moment, the dojo didn't feel like a place divided by pride anymore. It felt whole, bound together not by noise or bravado, but by something quieter, stronger. Respect. The dojo never felt the same after that night. Ryan's belt still lay folded in the corner of David Park's office. A quiet reminder of what pride without discipline costs. Some parents whispered about him, wondering where he'd gone, but most turned their eyes toward the woman who had stood in the center of the mat without raising her voice, who had faced fire with silence and still come out whole. Kesha kept her rhythm the same. She opened the dojo early, cleaned mats even when Marcus insisted he'd do it, guided beginners through stances with slow, patient gestures. But the air around her had changed. People bowed deeper. Parents spoke of her with reverence. The students watched her more closely, not with fear but with trust. Aiden's growth was the most obvious. He moved sharper now, with a confidence that made him look taller than his age. After class he would stay behind, asking to repeat drills, showing her his progress, signing so fast his mother laughed trying to keep up. One evening after landing a clean kick during sparring he signed proudly. I didn't fall. Just like you said. Kesha bowed to him, her eyes soft, and signed back. You stood. That is strength. The article in the local paper had only been the beginning. Soon word reached a regional magazine. They sent a photographer who captured her in mid-motion. Her fists wrapped, her eyes focused, children watching in awe behind her. The article ran with the title, "The Silent Teacher Who Changed a Dojo." Messages poured in. Teachers asking her to speak to students, community centers wanting her guidance, parents writing that their children needed someone like her. At first, Kesha resisted. She didn't want microphones or stages. But Maria reminded her gently but firmly, "It's not about you wanting the spotlight. It's about kids like Aiden needing to see you in it." So she agreed. Her first talk was at a small middle school gymnasium. Dozens of kids sat cross-legged on the floor, restless, curious. She stood in front of them, still in her GI, and Maria by her side to voice her words. Kesha signed slowly. "People told me I didn't belong. They told me silence was weakness. But silence can be strong. Because silence makes you listen. And listening makes you powerful." The children were quiet in a way teachers said they rarely were. Some leaned forward, their eyes shining. Others clapped hard at the end. And afterward, one girl with a hearing aid approached her, eyes wet. "Thank you," she whispered, trembling. Maria translated the girl's thanks again. And Kesha placed a hand on her shoulder, nodding. More invitations came. Each time Kesha stood taller. Each time Maria's voice carried her signs, but it was her presence the kids remembered. The way she didn't need to shout to command the room. The way her silence felt like proof instead of absence. Back at the dojo, change rippled outward. Enrollment doubled. Families who had never considered martial arts before signed their kids up, because they wanted them to learn not just how to fight, but how to stand. David shook his head often, half smiling. "I built this dojo," he said once, "but you gave it a heart." Kesha only bowed in thanks. Even Ryan's shadow faded with time. He never returned. Some said he trained in another city. Others said he quit martial arts altogether. For Kesha it didn't matter. His storm had passed, and what he left behind was a garden she hadn't expected to grow. Months later, the dojo held its first community showcase. Students performed forms, sparred lightly, demonstrated techniques. Parents clapped, cameras flashed, but the loudest cheer came when Aiden, now a yellow belt, stepped into the center and signed his introduction before sparring a boy his age. He fought steady, calm, patient, the way Kesha had taught him. He lost the round, but when he bowed at the end, the applause filled the room like thunder. Afterward, he ran to her, face glowing, and signed proudly, "I stood. I never gave up." She knelt, hugged him tightly, and signed back. That is victory. That night, as the dojo emptied, David turned to her. "I think," he said slowly, "this place was always waiting for you." Kesha stood in the quiet, the mats cool beneath her bare feet, the air thick with the smell of effort and hope. She thought of the mop she once pushed across those mats, the silence she once carried like a shield. And she thought of what it had become, a voice. A voice without sound but louder than shouts, stronger than pride. The photo on her fridge no longer felt like a memory she had to hide. Felt like a beginning that led here. And the box of medals in her closet didn't feel like relics anymore. They felt like stepping stones, part of a path she had finally accepted. When she left the dojo that night, Aiden and Maria walked with her. The boy signed something quick, his smile wide. "You changed everything." Kesha looked at him for a long moment, then signed back. "No, we changed everything." The city buzzed around them, cars honking, neon lights flashing. But inside her there was only quiet. Not the heavy quiet of loneliness, but the steady quiet of peace. And for the first time in years, she realized she no longer feared being seen. She welcomed it. Because her silence was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone who found strength in it. Respect. Dignity. Belonging. That was her true victory.